We now come to the debate on the availability of driving tests. Shuffle of personnel. Same Minister. We have a Minister, we have the proposer. I think we can start. Peter Swan.
I beg to move that the House has considered the availability of driving tests. Thank you very much, Sir Roger. It's an honour to serve under you as Chair today. Driving test delays are a source of misery, anger and lost opportunity across my constituency and the country. Today, a new learner will have to wait on average 4.5 months for a driving test, over double the wait 9 years ago, and nearly 50% higher than 4 years ago. New learners in my constituency must wait on average over 5 months for their test, some of the worst waiting times in the country, which have more than tripled since records began in 2015. That is 5 months when my constituents travel and therefore their ambitions are severely restricted. Honourable members will remember vividly the great feeling of liberation in getting behind the wheel for the first time after passing our driving tests. Today, this rite of passage, instead of a moment of great excitement, is a source of punishing expense, confusion and misery for too many of my constituents. Take, for example, the situation of Molly, my constituent who is having to pay to do her theory again because, like the majority of drivers, she failed her first practical and now must wait another 5 months to take a test. I confess, I too did not pass my driving test the first time, a fact my partner, who did pass first time, always likes to remind me whenever I offer backseat commentary on his handling of Bracknell's many roundabouts. Though what was for me a source of slight irritation is to Molly a significant logistical hurdle with real-world costs. Having struggled to book her test the first time, she now needs to go through the whole long process again. She faces continuing expenses to keep up lessons, using public transport to get around and to possibly retake her theory simply because it's reached its 2-year limit. Common also are stories like Teresa's, who, unable to find a test for her son for 6 months, booked him a test in Wales, which involved a costly round trip and an overnight stay, all just to get a test sorted in a reasonable time frame. I had other constituents contact me who had gone as far afield as the Isle of Wight and Aberdeen to get tests. Aberdeen is 500 miles from my constituency. When even simple systems like the provision of driving exams break down, inequalities deepen and opportunities dry up. Young people in my area are now seeing their career aspirations and their education take a hit as they look at a half-year delay before they can gain the independence of driving. There's been national and regional coverage on this story for years since the 2020 spike in driving tests demand, and yet the previous Conservative government failed to get a grip of the crisis. On the one hand, talking a big game about asking examiners to work ever longer hours in an ever-exhausting push for short-term solutions. Then, on the other, blaming examiners for striking over pay and conditions. And what do their fiddling around the edges get us? Today, waiting lists are more than double where they were in August of 2020, and young learners are exposed to more vicious test touting than at any time since. It's true that the DVSA responded to the immediate spike in 2020 by adding 1,000 more test slots, and over the year from 2022 to 23, cancelled the accounts of more than 600 fake businesses abusing their service to block book test slots just to sell them on. Yet driving test centres in the year to March 2024 also cancelled over 68,000 tests due to illness and industrial action. Driving instructors in my constituency tell me this is often last minute, and due to the delays, pushes students back months. An increasing number of students are turning to the black market to get hold of tests, exposing themselves to fraud, abuse and spiralling hidden costs, as test touters continue to exploit multiple flaws in the booking system to fuel their exploitative business model.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I'd be delighted.
I would. Thank you. You talked about driving instructors, and There's also a significant backlog in terms of driving tests to qualify as a driving instructor. So I wondered whether my honourable friend would agree with me that it's really important we also look to address the backlog in getting driving instructors passing their tests as well.
Absolutely, and I've also spoken
Swallow.
to businesses in my community, in my constituency, who have highlighted the difficulties with getting tests for driving larger minivans and lorries, which we know have been a huge issue. So this isn't just about sort of your bog standard driving test to get on the road, although that is a significant issue. It's a whole system-wide issue. Now, examiner illness is not something the party opposite can be blamed for. But whether it was striking doctors, nurses, train drivers or driving test examiners, the Conservative legacy is of pushing workers to the brink and then denying responsibility when industrial action is the inevitable result. I heard from my constituent Chris, a driving instructor, who explained how the local community of instructors are at their wits' end over this issue. They feel powerless to stop students turning to the black market to book tests. Driving examiners in Bracknell are getting up before 6 a.m. on a Monday morning when local centres release a week's worth of tests, and by 6:02, every single slot is gone. And these tests are 6 months away. And yet greedy and unscrupulous test touters are using bots and fake business accounts to block book these sessions and then sell them on at ludicrous premiums. My constituents are scraping together hundreds of pounds to pay double, triple the test price, only to have their details cloned, and these black market operators then use them to squeeze others out of the market. Meanwhile, some learners are, more innocently, paying big fees to apps and websites, which simply trawl the DVSA database and spot cancelled tests for drivers to book last minute. This has fueled understandable concerns that drivers are showing up to tests underprepared, winging it on the hope that they just about pass, rather than avoid waiting 5 months to take a test when they're properly ready. So, may I urge the Minister to set out today what steps can be taken to end this financial abuse? The practice of test touting is against DVSA policy, but what more can we do to end it altogether? Has the Minister considered whether the practice of reselling driving tests for profit can be made illegal, in line with our proposed plans to tackle ticket touting? Or can the system be fixed so that only legitimate driving instructors are able to transfer tests between their students? Learner drivers pushed into taking their tests early by a broken system are more likely to fail, and therefore more likely to need to book another test, thereby further fueling pressure on test centres and pushing up demand. What more can we do to ensure more learners pass first time, unlike me? And will the Minister ask the DVSA to investigate opening a test centre in my constituency, which sits in a desert of driving test provision between the M3 and M4? The nearest test centres to Bracknell are Reading and Farnborough. How can it be practical that a town of over 120,000 people is not served by its own test centre? I'd like to briefly touch on the connected subject of car insurance, if I may. For many young people, the financial pressure of becoming a new driver does not abate when they have finally managed to book and then pass their test. Next comes a hefty bill for car insurance. It's perfectly reasonable for younger and otherwise less experienced drivers to be charged more for car insurance, as statistically they are more likely to have an accident, but too many of my constituents are paying far more than is reasonable. Car insurance premiums have shot up by 21% since June 2022. This is not just an issue for young people in my constituency. I've also been contacted by older drivers with many years' experience on the road who are being priced out of the market altogether. So I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome the action taken by the Secretary of State for Transport today to launch a new task force to address this pressing issue. The struggles faced by my constituents and by learner drivers across the country represents a brake on our national productivity and an unbearable frustration to our young people who, in understandable desperation, are exposing themselves to fraud and financial abuse at the hands of bad actors cynically exploiting this situation. I will.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend from Bracknell, which is a very nice thing to say from the backbenches.
here. My honourable friend raises a very important point, and as he touches on insurance, I wonder if I could bring in public transport and adequate public transport. In Madeley and in Betley and Newcastle under Lyme, you are increasingly, or I am increasingly, receiving letters and emails from people who have had the ability to secure that test that they failed after the first one is now being pushed further, rather like the 5 months that my honourable friend refers to. But it's the double whammy is the lack of any viable, meaningful, affordable public transport, particularly in Madeley and Betley. So without that, and then the added pressures, as my honourable friend points out of driving tests that may be available pushed further and further away, it leaves many of my constituents, like those in Bracknell, at breaking point.
That's a fantastic point, and perhaps on another day I could opine about our train links, which have not improved since the 1970s. But that, I fear, is a debate for another day. But the point you raise is an excellent one. Not only young people, but many young people look to passing their driving test as a real sense of liberation and freedom, and that is particularly true in communities where public transport, after 14 years of Conservative government, is not where it should be. So absolutely, it must be the priority of this government to improve transport connectivity for all communities, particularly rural and semi-rural communities. But also, it is clear that this government must be and is on the side of the driver. And for that reason, I would really urge the Minister to make real headway on this really important issue. The situation cannot continue. And after years of chaos under the Conservatives, the government have inherited a broken test system and now must fix another Tory mess. All the while, my constituents face unacceptable waits and undue stress. Passing your driving test should be a moment of great joy and freedom. But for too many, the journey to passing has become a one-way trip to frustration and misery.
Question is, this House has considered the availability of driving tests.
Okay, just before we proceed, I'm going to call those who have submitted letters. Not every member present has written in, and not every member rising has written in. I have to give priority to those who submitted an application to participate in the debate first. The second point I have to make, sadly, is that this is very time limited indeed. I'm going to have to impose a time limit of 3 minutes, and I may have to reduce that. Jim Shannon.
First of all, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for Bracknell for setting the scene. He's right to say that the issue of driving licence and available driving tests is not just specific to his constituency, it is across the whole of the United Kingdom. Very pleased to see the Minister in our place and look forward to her contribution as well. We have witnessed since the pandemic that for some areas across the United Kingdom there are still parts that are suffering with increasingly long waiting times. And for Northern Ireland, which isn't the responsibility of the Minister to be fair, but since it adds to this debate, I wanted to make that contribution. This has only recently improved, so it's good to be here and give the Northern Ireland perspective. Could I reiterate and endorse his comments about car insurance? My colleague, the lady for Upper Bann, had a debate here in the last term of Parliament on that very issue. Some of my constituents who have just got their first car and applied for their first insurance have a cost of between £4,000 and £5,000. For some, it's 4 times the value of their car, and that's what their insurance is, just to get them on the road. So he's right to make that issue. Figures that have been released by the Department of Transport have stated that lorry drivers are facing a wait for at least 4 months for their tests, double the length of delays before the COVID pandemic. So there really is, it's also been said there's largely due to the fact that appointments are only reached on a 24-week rolling basis. In Northern Ireland, specifically, Sir Roger, there were increasingly long delays, especially over the summer months. One of my staff members waited 4.5 months for a test date in our local area, just down the road from us, with cancellations being so sparse due to difficulty getting a test to begin with. There are also concerns, Sir Roger, for money with potential for the theory test, and just so maybe to make this mark and this point, that they can run out. In Northern Ireland, once a theory test is passed, there are 2 years until it runs out of date, and you could apply for your test. You may not get your test first time round. You may have to wait for another test, and all of a sudden your theory test is out of date, and you have to start the whole process again. So many in Northern Ireland don't consider starting practical lessons until they pass their theory. So it's important that practical test backlogs are dealt with to ensure that theory tests do not run out. The learner drivers don't have to resit these. There's also a cost that comes along with this, and for young people specifically, this could be at a detriment to their learning. I'm aware in recent weeks and months some improvements have been made, but it's evident across so many countries, and especially in the areas of mainland England and indeed Northern Ireland, that their backlogs have to be addressed. So I look to the Minister perhaps to add her contribution, and could I ask her, in addition to the many things that the Honourable Lady will refer to, can I ask her, has she had the chance to have any correspondence or contact with the infrastructure back home to discuss productive ways in which we can deal with backlogs for learner drivers? Sir Roger, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank the member for Bracknell for securing this debate on such an important issue. I know I speak for many members across the House when I say what a pressing issue the lack of driving test availability is for so many in our constituencies. And I've been contacted by many residents in Hastings and Rye trying to get driving tests, but being faced with very long waits when they log on to the DVLA system. Is having a really big impact on many constituents. We have new parents who are hoping to get a driving test in time for the arrival of babies. We have people with caring responsibilities, and also people who have a business need to get that driving test secured. So it's a really important issue that matters to many across our constituencies. I really welcome the Labour government's commitment to cutting the waiting times for driving tests and making this a key priority. I think it's great that the Secretary of State has met with the Chief Executive of the DVLA to really grip this problem and make clear that it's a key priority, because it is such a pressing issue for so many across our constituencies. And I want to make sure that I leave plenty of time for colleagues to intervene on this important debate. So I will end my remarks there.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and may I also commend my colleague from Bracknell for his excellent work on this very important issue. I am also very conscious of the pressure of time, so I'll try to keep my remarks as brief as possible. I wanted to refer and underline some of the points made by my honourable friend and other colleagues, and also to talk about the specific problems in Reading. First and foremost, Sir Roger, it is really important to restate just how important it is to learn to drive. It is a rite of passage. It's also an opportunity for young people to gain extra mobility, and many others, as my honourable friend from Hastings and Rye rightly pointed out, to gain extra mobility, but also potentially to gain economic benefits through opening up opportunities to a wider range of jobs. And that is hugely important. Even in areas like Reading, where there's excellent public transport, there are many people who rely on cars to travel, quite understandably, and that provides extra mobility and access to a wider range of services and job opportunities. So the particular points I would like to highlight about my own constituency really follow on from my honourable friend's points, and they are in many cases even worse. So in the Reading urban area, there are 250,000 people. We're the second biggest urban area in the southeast of England, with a very young population and many young people seeking to learn to drive, and yet there have been serious backlogs developing in the last few years. Some of that obviously has connection to the pandemic, but I'm afraid the previous government arguably appears to have mismanaged this very important public service, and our residents, my residents and constituents of other neighbouring MPs are suffering as a result. The issue of having to travel a long way and long waits are quite significant for many people in the Reading area, and I've had constituents who've had to travel as far, I can't say Aberdeen, but I can say Cheshire, which is obviously a very significant distance away, East Anglia, and I've also heard a story of a family where they were on holiday in Cornwall and the parents helped their son or daughter book a test in Cornwall because that was the only place they could get a test. And clearly that situation is completely unacceptable. That's been made worse by issues with the booking software, and I've had a number of meetings with local driving instructors who wanted to urge me to raise this with the Minister, and I do hope that more can be done. I appreciate work is underway on this, and that the officials in the department are trying to tackle this problem, but there is some gaming of the system going on, which is causing great pressure to many constituents, and indeed adding to the cost of getting a test. Now, to make matters even worse in my own area, the current test centre on Elgar Road South in Reading, which is well known, is due to close in the spring of 2025. Potentially, there is a replacement, but we don't know where that is or when that will open.
And that is causing, this delay and the uncertainty is causing a great deal of uncertainty for local residents and for young people and others seeking to learn to drive. Reading residents face the prospect of having to drive to Basingstoke to take their test, which is quite a significant journey, and in terms of time and cost would add a great deal of cost and time onto learning to drive and to passing their test. So I do hope the Minister will be able to offer some update on that. I realise this matter is a commercial one for the Department, but maybe she will be able to write to me with an update on the progress of the negotiations for a new test centre in the Reading area, which will serve this very large population of ours. So just finally, and I do appreciate the pressure on time, I would like to thank my honourable friend again for securing this important debate.
Chairmanship, it's a pleasure, and for the Honourable Member from Bracknell. During COVID lockdown, 850,000 tests were cancelled, and the service has been struggling ever since. Plus, the demand for driving tests currently outweighs the availability. Since 2023, so over 18 months ago, the average wait time for a driving test in Portsmouth has been stuck around 24 weeks. But in 2019, it was 8 weeks. So that's an increase of 200%. But as we've already heard, the truer figure may well be bigger because they're logging on and it's 24 weeks and there's no appointments, so they could be waiting for longer. In the test centre at Portsmouth, the rate of passing is about 50%, so the average person is taking 2 tests and leaving at least a year to be test ready. That's causing huge financial and emotional impact, and also in some cases impact on the opportunity to go to work and live their lives. And also, as we've heard, the need to retake their theory. While many around are experiencing worse, I know we're not the lowest in the table, it is not a race to the bottom. My constituencies have written to me to describe their distress at being unable to book tests in a reasonable time and the extortionate price touts that are reselling them with the softbot software that we've already heard about. Like others, I welcome and echo the sentiments around the Transport Secretary's willingness to tackle this as a key priority for the Labour government. Additional funding is required to tackle the enormous backlog in tests, and this could be directed towards making additional driving test slots available, recruiting and retaining more examiners, and also putting in place laws to stop those bot blockers. And improving that, and by doing that, we could improve the technology of the booking system to detect those, because the Chief Executive of the Driving Standards Agency, back in 2023, described the booking system as at an end of life. I'd like to hear what we're able to do. Thank you very much.
Rosie Writing.
And also, I want to thank the member for Bracknell for securing this important debate, which I know is an issue that matters so deeply to many of our constituents. The national waiting time for driving tests is about 4.5 months. But during the summer, in my constituency of Kettering, this rose to 6 months. Someone ready for their tests in July might still be waiting to take it in January next year. I've recently spoken to the chair of Kettering District Area Driving Instructors Association, who tells me his members are all saying the same thing. Both instructors and pupils are frustrated by the lack of tests available and how frequently they are cancelled. Driving test slots are released every Monday at 6 a.m, but my constituents have told me that by 6:10 they are all gone. They say that often some slots are booked and then, as we've heard about, advertised on social media for up to £250. So, Roger, my constituents are trying to book their driving tests not to see Oasis. Between April 2023 and March this year, over 100,000 driving tests were cancelled. 363 of those were at Kettering's test centre. My constituents have told me that tests are regularly cancelled at a week's notice, and some are cancelled as late as the day before. Many of us in this room will remember how stressful learning to drive was, and how nervous we were the day before our tests, and these cancellations are really amplifying that. Pupils who are test ready are then having to face their tests being cancelled, and a difficult choice of continuing to pay for lessons that they don't need, or stopping and risk being rusty on the day of their tests. There is no doubt that learners across the UK are confused and angry. Many learners are young people who will need their driving licences to access work opportunities. During the Tory cost of living crisis and the chaos we have inherited, it just isn't fair that young people aren't able to access the opportunities they need to get into work. So I'd be grateful if the Minister could please outline for my constituents what the work of the government is doing to boost the number of driving tests that are available for the people in Kettering and across the UK, and reduce the number of tests that are cancelled last minute. Let's steer our new Labour government towards a future of accessible and relying driving tests for all our constituents. Thank you, Chair.
John Davies.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the member for Bracknell for securing this debate, and it's good to see the Minister in her place. Skills and opportunities and job creation are at the top of my agenda as Member of Parliament for Telford. I know that for many in this room, that will be the same for them. And the Government is doing a lot of work to improve skills and opportunities for jobs and qualifications in places like mine. But the role that transport plays in that process cannot be overstated. As of September 2024, the average waiting time for a driving test in the Midlands and South West was more than 21 weeks, around 5 months, the highest of any region in the country. And that average, as we've already heard, does not include the countless people who can't book a test in the first place or are being put off by the amount of delays. The chronic shortage of driving tests disproportionately affects young people and those most in need of access to training and for jobs. There are many parts of the country where having to wait months upon months for a driving test or not get one at all is also surmountable for young people, because their opportunities within walking or to catch public transport simply do not exist. For young people in places like mine, the difference between waiting 1 month and 1 year for a driving test could mean not getting the qualification at the local college. It could mean not being able to get that job that they've applied for and have been successful in obtaining. And it could mean worse outcomes for their families. I conducted a survey in my constituency on this issue, and over 40% of constituents who responded to that survey said that they have had to book a driving test before they've taken a single driving lesson, which puts a huge amount of pressure on those young people. And around 50% of those who completed my survey said that the delays in booking a test made it less likely that they would start to learn to drive in the first place, a barrier to development, a barrier to getting to work. Sir Roger, unless this is addressed, this problem is only going to get worse. And we know from the government, quite rightly, that economic growth is the #1 mission, but so is breaking down opportunities. Getting a grip of this issue will impact on both of those missions. And I asked the Minister whether she will create a task force that she can hold these officials to account for improvement on this, because ultimately it is a barrier to opportunity, a barrier to employment, and a barrier for our young people.
Kevin McKenna.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd really like to say a big thank you to my honourable friend from Bracknell for enabling this debate to happen, and for everyone that's raised the issues here. I'm not going to add too much to the detail of what people have added, but have said already, but to talk a bit about the impacts on my constituents. I also need to declare an interest. I've reached 50 years of age without learning to drive, but recent changes to my circumstances at the start of July have meant there's a good reason to and a strong imperative. And when I was researching this over the summer for myself and my husband, it became very clear that that was not an easy and immediate option for either of us. So, but that wasn't a surprise given the amount of messages already in my inbox. And just by way of an example, a constituent of mine, Jai, came to my surgery on behalf of his daughter, who's desperate to start a career as a police officer, something that obviously we deeply need in our constituencies and across the country. She can't start the job because she needs to be able to drive for the job. She'll be working in shifts. All she could find was a driving test months down the line in Birmingham, 150 miles away. She's one of the luckier constituents that she could actually find one. Now, my constituency has some significant areas of deprivation. I don't know, Sir Roger, whether you've been looking at the data packs that were produced by the Thames Gateway Growth Board, the Thames Estuary Growth Board this week, but they show some really significant transport black spots in my constituency and in yours, often associated with the areas of deepest deprivation, where it takes hours to get to centres for employment, And frankly, although we need to improve public transport, although we need to improve those accessibility routes, it's going to take time. And also in constituencies like mine and many others in this room, with a lot of rural areas, we're always going to need to drive cars. It's a fundamental. The questions that I want to ask around the changes and improvements and things that have been, steps that have been taken already are, there's been improvements to capacity, to the capacity and number of tests and people carrying out the tests. I want to know how sustainable that is and what's the plan for sustainability, and also what's been learned in terms of actually how could we do things differently in the future to make sure that we don't get into this mess again. The other thing is the issue of ticket touting. I mean, it's blatant, it's obviously ticket touting. The technology available now with bots and other online grifters, frankly, turning a public service into a way for them to make money in a piratical way. What are the lessons for other implementations of digital services for this government as increasingly that's the way that services will be delivered? Thank you.
Jazz Athol, you're on the list, but you're not rising. Do you not wish to speak?
Thank you, Sir Roger. I can't speak because I haven't made my maiden speech. I will make an intervention very shortly. Thank you.
Julie Minns.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. It is a number of decades since I took my own driving test in my constituency of Carlisle, and I was therefore very grateful to a constituent who recently attended my advice surgery to highlight the issues his business, he is a driving instructor, his business was facing in securing driving tests in the Carlisle area. He went further to suggest a couple of potential, not so necessarily solutions, but measures that might be taken. And I'd be grateful if the Minister perhaps could comment on these in her closing remarks. In Carlisle, we are looking at a wait time of approaching 5 months to be able to get a test at the Carlisle Test Centre. Just up the road in Dumfries, it's a wait of just over a month. And my constituent asks, I feel very reasonably, why there can't be greater flexibility in moving the test instructors around neighbouring test centres. That seems very sensible, so greater flexibility there. Similarly, I welcome the steps that have been taken to counter the bots that are out there that are snapping up these tests with great pace. But what my constituent tells me is that in his case, it's led to 2 out of the 3 of his computers having their IP addresses being blocked, and when he contacts the DVSA to ask for the unblocking, the response is less than adequate. And again, I think that would help the legitimate businesses out there if they felt that their concerns were being responded to promptly by the DVSA.
Would the honourable member give way?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and can I thank the honourable member from Bracknell for securing such an important debate. Would the member, honourable friend, agree with me that the elephant in the room is the fraud that's going on an industrial scale? Whilst in Carlisle it takes 5 months, similarly in Ilford South, in East London, it's about 6 months. But I rang a local driving instructor who has raised this issue with me. I could get 4 tests in Dorchester, 7 in Cheltenham, 8 in Bromley, 3 in Erith, and if I didn't want to travel, I could pay a premium rate of £300 and it can be done at the local test centre 50 yards from my house. That is something which we need to really address, if the honourable member agrees with that.
Yes.
I entirely concur with your remarks there. It is unacceptable that we have so many people waiting so many months for their driving tests, and in areas like mine where public transport is little or non-existent, the economic impact of not being able to work is considerable. And I think, again, one of the things that the DVSA could potentially be looking at to help our government is recording, when people are waiting for the tests, the fact that they are actually required to drive for their job, and that data isn't currently captured, and I think would be extremely beneficial to be captured. If I can conclude on a related point with regard to the performance of the DVLA and the delays that they are now experiencing, and they are increasing, in carrying out medical assessments on people who, for whatever reason, are temporarily unable to drive, but are waiting, and again, in the case of one of my constituents, over 18 months for a routine medical assessment after having a stroke. And this was a number of months after his own doctor had said that he believed he was now able to drive. So we have delays with the DVSA, and we also have delays with the DVLA when it comes to medical assessments. And I would be grateful, Sir Roger, if the Minister could address that issue also in her remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Bracknell on securing this debate and the excellent points he and other speakers have made. As we've heard today from members from across the House, it is taking far too long to secure a driving test, with centres fully booked up months in advance. Although the problem was exacerbated by COVID, waiting lists were growing long before the pandemic, with 26 test centres active since 2015. Yes, the lockdown made things worse, but things are still not improving, and more should have been done by the previous government to address the backlog. As a result of the insufficient testing capacity within the system, as we've heard, a black market has arisen, with individuals forced to compete with computer bots to book the precious few slots available the moment they come online. My good friend Dino Muir, a driving instructor who covers Wimbledon, tells me that inevitably an increasing number of people are turning to these unscrupulous profiteers to beat the queues and paying an extortionate price as a consequence. According to recent data from the RAC, people are paying over 3 times the normal price to book a driving test on the black market. The situation is not only limited to personal vehicles. George, a constituent of mine and young junior doctor, told me only yesterday of a friend of his, a newly trained paramedic, having to wait 4 months to take the C1 driving test he needs to drive an ambulance. Whilst data from my party recently revealed over 700 NHS staff across the country who, like George's friend, are waiting to take this test. This is simply unacceptable. Providing driving tests in a timely manner should not be beyond any government. Yes, you've inherited a failing system, but you now need to sort it out, as these delays are affecting people's lives and, as we've heard, damaging our economy. So in concluding, I'd simply like to ask the Minister, who I hope she knows I hold in high regard, what she's going to do to clear this backlog. Are more tests going to be made available? Is the government going to do more to stop the bots booking up all the available slots? Urgent action is needed, and I look forward to hearing her response. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I too congratulate the honourable gentleman for Bracknell for securing this important debate. Like other members that have spoken this afternoon, I see the impact of this issue every week in my own inbox, and indeed in the last Parliament for the 4.5 years I spent on the Transport Select Committee looking at this issue as it evolved, particularly through the pandemic and the post-pandemic period. Teenagers who've been waiting months, sometimes over a year, to get a driving test. People who've come to the United Kingdom to work, stuck in limbo, waiting for a test. I see the worrying knock-on effects for social and economic mobility for young people, particularly in rural areas like mine in mid-Buckinghamshire, where freedom and opportunity very often come with the keys and the ability to drive a car. In rural areas, as other members have mentioned, public transport often isn't a viable option for many of the journeys. Young people can be locked out of opportunities even within short distances of their own homes. And young tradespeople, plumbers, electricians, builders, carpenters, despite being qualified, cannot do their job without a car or a van. This creates a shortage in the local area, in turn creating inflation for homeowners unable to source labour for weeks or even months. And it's not just the individual who suffers, Sir Roger. I also see the impact on communities of young people and others being stuck at home, unable to support elderly relatives and family members requiring care, in some cases not being able to respond to a family emergency that could be a matter of life and death. It's simply not tenable to stand by and let the situation carry on, not when, as the RAC report, unofficial websites are exploiting learner drivers to the tune of hundreds of pounds, more than 3 times or sometimes 4 times the cost of an official DVSA booking, and other third parties are profiting from the backlog through cancellation alert schemes and apps which charge users a one-off fee to receive alerts every time a slot becomes available sooner than their original test booking. Sign-up fees can still set drivers back nearly twice the amount of an official test with VIP action and VIP packages. This problem requires very firm action. But I do want to mention, as others on the government benches have criticised the previous government, actually post-pandemic the Conservative government did take clear action. We opened up nearly 10% more driving tests every week than before the pandemic by the end of 2022. But despite the DVSA making 1 million extra tests available since the pandemic, 1 million extra tests, Sir Roger, waiting times have remained stubbornly high. That's partly because of a growing economy that the new government has inherited and the demand that has created for new tests. Not my words, Sir Roger, the words of the Chief Executive of the DVSA. There's a huge amount of work that needs to be done. And I'm concerned, Sir Roger, that we've seen frighteningly little urgency from the new government to sort this problem out. Just last week at Transport Questions, the Secretary of State responded to a question on this crisis by suggesting that examiners would simply be deployed to areas with higher waiting times from areas with lower waiting times. If that is the extent of this government's plan to move examiners around like a game of whack-a-mole, then these backlogs will be going nowhere. We need to increase capacity, but according to the DVSA, one of the main contributing factors to a lack of tests is sustained industrial action, and that must be combated head-on. Post-COVID, the Passport Office showed the way. Within 2 years of the pandemic finishing, thanks to a great new system, brilliant leadership, the backlog was smashed. There is hope that if the right measures are put in place, if the government really puts their mind to it, these problems are not intractable and can indeed be solved. I'd be delighted to give way.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for giving way. Some of this is also a long time coming. In Telford, for example, there's just 2 driving test assessors for the whole of the borough, which serves most of Shropshire, a population of around 500,000. The previous government should have done succession planning around those driving assessment instructors and recruited more. Why didn't they?
The honourable gentleman for his intervention. As I've stressed, the pandemic did blow a hole in the, as it did in virtually every walk of life, the availability of driving tests. We did get 1 million extra tests in place. Did every single test centre have exactly the resource it needed? Well, the answer to that is clearly no. And in the spirit of the debate that we're having, I'm ready to perfectly happily accept, certainly from the experience I had on the Transport Select Committee, for some of that 4.5 years where I served around that horseshoe on the Select Committee with the now Minister. And we did see these problems emerging. You never solve every single problem in government. I know the Minister will be readily happy to admit that she won't be able to solve every single problem that comes across her desk. But the broader picture is that you need the greater resource, the greater scaling up of the whole system to solve what is not just a backlog that still persists from the pandemic, but a growing demand. And I repeat, that's not my analysis, that is from the DVSA, a growing demand for driving tests too. So in conclusion, Sir Roger, my challenge to the Minister is, where does this sit on her priority list? Is this something that the new government wants to solve as an absolute matter of urgency for motorists up and down the country trying to get their driving licence, trying to get on in life, get the opportunity, the freedom, and yes, the pleasure of driving here in the United Kingdom? Or is this something that is going to fall down the priority list and not get the action that thousands of people up and down this land want and deserve?
Minister. Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Sir Roger. I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Bracknell for securing this debate and for setting out so clearly the challenges his constituents face. And I'd also like to thank all the Honourable members who've contributed to this debate on behalf of learners and indeed driving instructors in their constituencies. I think we heard compelling contributions from the Honourable members for Strangford, for Hastings and Rye, from Reading, Portsmouth North, Kettering, Telford, Sittingbourne and Sheppey, Carlisle, Wimbledon and of course the Shadow Minister too. A full driving licence can give the holder so many opportunities. It can support drivers' access to education and jobs. And I very much recognise that being unable to book a test can hold people back. And that's not acceptable because we want to boost growth and we want to boost opportunities. Driving gives freedoms to so many people up and down the country, although I do agree wholeheartedly with my honourable friend for Newcastle under Lyme that we need much better public transport too to give young people a choice of transport options, and not everyone is able to drive. Nearly everyone who has a full driving licence will have a story about how they, when they learned to drive or when they took their test. It is part of our culture, it is a rite of passage. However, the current situation for many learners in this country is simply unacceptable, and that includes his constituent, Molly, and many others who've been referenced today. Some are travelling long distances for a test or paying extra to try and get to the front of the queue. It takes far too long for those who are ready to take their driving test to book that practical test appointment. And drivers who are ready to pass should be able to take a test quickly and easily without paying more or travelling far. Now, fixing this issue is a priority the Secretary of State and I take very seriously. Members will recall that the Secretary of State made visiting DVSA in Bristol to discuss solutions and an early priority. Work is ongoing and yes, we are determined to solve it. Now, practical test waiting times remain high because of increased demand. That demand has translated into waiting times for driving tests that are the longest they have been for many years, despite the DVSA making available a near record 2 million tests last year. That pent-up demand has also led to a change in customer behaviour, where the scramble for bookings too often leads to undesirable outcomes. People book tests miles away from where they live just to get a test on the system in the hope of changing it for one closer to home at a later date, but they can't always do that, and sometimes they end up taking a test a long way from home, as my honourable friends have described. And this change in booking behaviour prevents those who are ready to take their test booking at their nearest test centre, where waiting times have gone up. And as well as being inconvenient, of course, that's not great. That sort of test tourism has an environmental impact too. An even bigger issue is learners taking a test before they're ready to pass. Taking a test when the learner is ready, before they're ready, seriously reduces their chances of passing. So they need to take a second and then maybe even a third or fourth test. And that creates extra demand and adds to the issue DVSA is working so hard to resolve. And of course, it also creates potentially unacceptable additional risks for driving examiners and the public. Longer waiting times for a driving test also results in learners paying significantly more than the test fee to these unscrupulous opportunists who are preying on them and taking advantage of them, needing, in many cases, to take a test as soon as they can. In January 2023, DVSA changed its booking service terms and conditions to prevent anyone from selling tests at a profit. And since then, DVSA has issued 313 warnings, 766 suspensions and closed 705 business counts for misuse of its booking service. But there's more to do. And all the while, that leaves people who are ready to take their pass with fewer options and a longer wait. We want learners who are ready to pass to be able to take their test quickly and easily at a location that's convenient for them. We don't want them to feel the need to make difficult decisions and compromises when it comes to taking a practical test. And we need concrete measures that will make a real difference. And that's why we've asked the DVSA to look at how their tests are booked and managed. We want a test booking system that supports learners to plan the learning to drive process properly, that gives them the confidence that they will be able to get a test when they need one, and that's easy to use and protects them from being ripped off. Now, we're working hard on all those measures, and in the meantime, DVSA has been working hard to make more tests available. At any given time, around 500,000 tests are booked on the system, and as a result of DVSA efforts to increase capacity, around 90,000 tests are available within the 24-week booking window, but more needs to be done. DVSA has recruited and is training 250 new driving examiners this year and is working to recruit and train another 200, focusing on areas where demand is the highest. And of course, we also need to retain those driving examiners. And I know that previous poor industrial relations certainly won't have helped in that regard. Now, if we're successful at recruiting those 450, that is 20% more examiners overall and a much needed boost to test capacity for those learning to drive. And speaking specifically to my honourable friend for Bracknell, I can update him on driver examiner numbers in his nearest test centres. In Slough, there are currently 6, and we're based on our latest recruitment campaign, we're aiming to recruit 4, so to take that to 10. In Reading, there are 2. There's 1 new entrant driving examiner awaiting a training course. The aim is to recruit a further 5. And in Farnborough, there are 9, and DVSA are aiming to recruit a further 3 to take it to 12. So if we are successful in doing that, obviously it will make a big difference. On top of that, DVSA is continuing to conduct tests outside regular hours, including at weekends and on public holidays, and buying back annual leave from driving examiners. And I can assure, I can't remember which honourable friend asked me, but driving examiners do travel to other test centres with higher waiting times to try to bring them down. But of course, that isn't the long-term answer. I recognise that. Now, DVSA's Ready to Pass campaign supports learner drivers by offering free resources to assess their test readiness and encourages them to take more lessons if required. When the pass rate is less than 50%, we know that too many people are going along taking a test perhaps a bit too speculatively when they should be doing it when they're ready. But I completely understand the way things have come with people booking a test before they've even started taking any lessons. We also know that learners who undertake a mock test are far more likely to pass their test. So I would urge honourable members to direct their constituents to that Ready to Pass campaign and the really useful advice that's there. I think it's probably outside the scope of today's debate, but if my honourable friend for Carlisle would like to pass details of her constituent who is facing a delay in renewing their licence, waiting for medical tests, then of course I will happily look into it. Now, in conclusion, really, this department... Oh, of course, I will give...
Shannon.
A specific question that was what contact the Minister has had with the Northern Ireland Assembly Minister, the Minister for Infrastructure, and has or would the Minister do that, just to exchange ideas and thoughts how best we could do these things together. Thank you.
Well, no debate would be complete without an intervention from the honourable member for Strangford. I haven't yet had that opportunity to meet his colleague to discuss this particular issue, but of course I'd be very willing to do so. And it reminded me that I wanted to just respond to the question from my honourable friend for Reading, and just to say that DVSA is aware that the landlord of the current driving test centre in Reading has been granted planning permission to redevelop the site, as he referred to. DVSA has identified a new location. It's in the early stages of negotiations, but they will confirm the new location as soon as they're able. And I can assure him that I will continue to raise this in my regular meetings with the Chief Executive of the DVSA. In conclusion, Sir Roger, this department and DVSA recognise the impact that long driving test waiting times are having on learner drivers and indeed on driving instructors. It's our priority to reduce driving test waiting times whilst upholding road safety standards. We want everyone to enjoy a lifetime of safe and sustainable driving. And can I finally wish my honourable friend's constituent Molly very best wishes when she gets the opportunity to take her test. I'm sure we all hope that she passes second time. Thank you. Thank you.
Peter Swallow to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Sir Roger. I want to start by really thanking the Minister for the incredibly constructive way in which she's approached this debate and responded to the really sort of wide-ranging and serious issues raised by members here today. It's incredibly heartening to hear a reiteration that this is really a priority for this new Labour government, and that's demonstrated by the Secretary of State meeting with the CEO of DVSA at such an early stage. I'm very grateful that ministers have asked the DVSA to look at what more can be done to tackle test touts, and I would of course welcome further updates in due course on this really important issue. Test touts are taking advantage and we must see them cracked down on. I also want to thank the Minister for updating us on the situation with employing more driving examiners, which will be very, very welcome indeed for my constituents, although I would tempt her once again to examine opening a new test centre in Bracknell, because what could be better than more driving examiners than another place to put them? That would be really wonderful. Yes, I want to thank my honourable friends and members across the House for taking part in this debate. We heard from constituents affected really across the country: Strangford, Hastings and Rye, Reading Central, Portsmouth North, Kettering, Telford, Sittingbourne and Sheppey, Carlisle and Ilford South, and this really demonstrates the breadth of this issue.
The question is that this House has considered the availability of driving tests. Many of that opinion say aye. No. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.